I'll begin this afternoon session with a brief introduction. Welcome to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's National Electronic Lecture Program. My name is Sharon Young, and I will be hosting today's session. Today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026, and this is the sixth session in the e-lecture series entitled Applied Research Perspectives Across the Canadian Forest Service. This series is a collaborative effort coordinated between the Canadian Forest Service and the Canadian Council of Forest Ministers. The CIF-IFC is very pleased to collaborate and host these webinars. For today's session, we are pleased to welcome Aileen, Duncan, and Erin Fraser-Reid, who will present Trees and Communities, overview of urban forestry at the Canadian Forest Service, and an introduction to a new community-based adaptation guidebook. To begin, Aileen Duncan is a senior policy analyst with the Canadian Forest Service. She is a registered professional forester in Ontario, a certified arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture, and a graduate of the Master of Forest Conservation program at the University of Toronto. She is also a certified tree seed collector with the Forest Gene Conservation Association. Joining her is Erin Fraser-Reid, the climate change adaptation lead at the Canadian Forest Service Northern Forestry Centre in Edmonton. Prior to this role, Erin spent 13 years with the Government of Alberta as a senior reforestation specialist, where she focused on applied reforestation and reclamation research, as well as science policy integration. Erin holds a PhD and a Master's of Science in Forest Ecology and Management from the University of Alberta, a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources Management from the University of Northern British Columbia, and a Technical Diploma in Forestry from the British Columbia Institute of Technology. She has been a registered professional forester in Alberta since 2002. With that, I will now pass it over to Aileen to begin today's presentation.
Thanks for the introduction. So as you heard, my name is Aileen Duncan. I work with the Canadian Forest Service. So today we're going to start off with a bit of a broader kind of policy view, and then we're going to go into a more applied example with Erin. So let's dive in here. So I'll begin with a short overview of the Canadian Forest Service, or CFS. As you know, we love our acronyms, so you might hear that one again. This this organization was established in 1899, so we're celebrating our 127th anniversary this year. We have a national workforce with sites across the country, and about 75% of our staff are located outside of the capital region. We have a long tradition of supporting forest science through our regional centers, research forests, and the National Tree Seed Center in New Brunswick. The Canadian Forest Service has made research contributions in areas including pest management, forest climate change, wildfire prevention mitigation, and more. I'm just going to take a minute to chat about governance and jurisdiction in Canada because, this wouldn't be a policy presentation without talking governance. So forest management is provincial and territorial jurisdiction. This means that the federal government does not directly manage lands except those that we own, and respecting that jurisdiction is really important to us. When it comes to urban forestry, it's really the municipalities who are on the front lines as the primary managers of urban forests. Municipalities are essentially creatures of the province, and so there are some sensitivities with direct engagement between the federal and municipal levels of government. It really has to be done in a way that respects jurisdiction. I would say the key federal role for forestry is related to supporting research and programs on sustainable forest management, conservation, and public safety. And one example of shared jurisdiction is with wildland fire research as it relates to fire risk in the wildland urban interface, or the WUI as we affectionately call it. The Fire Smart program, for example, receives funding from NRCan, and it provides guidance to communities on selecting, placing, and maintaining trees in ways that reduce wildfire risk near populated areas, while also supporting these healthy and resilient neighborhood landscapes. So this example of the wildland urban interface might have you wondering about our definition of urban forests. Since we are the federal government, it's important to take a national view of this term, and we've done so by being essentially as broad as possible. There is a huge difference between large urban centers like Toronto and smaller towns and communities. And the key point here is that urban is really a gradient, not one or the other. And managing the urban forest, I think thinking about how people and communities interact with the forest and trees is as important as the forest and trees themselves. And so near urban forests or peri-urban forests, as well as rural and remote communities, have unique risks and adaptation needs that we must consider for urban forestry. So we've created a new definition of urban forestry to help guide our research that is more inclusive to these different sizes of community. And this new definition is forest science, studying the trees and wooded natural spaces within and near to settled areas, including their uses, management, and resilience for economic, social, and public health benefits. In terms of why urban forests matter, I expect I don't need to convince too many people on this call why they matter. So maybe a better question here is why do they matter to the federal government? Often when we talk about the benefits of urban trees, we identify their value in providing ecosystem services, which are the benefits people obtain from nature. They describe all the ways ecosystems, including forests, wetlands, and oceans, support human well-being. For this government, some of the key mandate areas include home building, affordability, economic development, health and well-being, and climate adaptation and mitigation. So, to translate that to ecosystem services, we can value urban forests for their ability to mitigate urban heat effect, reduce costs and energy use in the summer and the winter, supporting stormwater management and erosion potential, and the many, many cultural and health related benefits. We also heard in the 2025 speech from the throne, which opened up this last session of Parliament and sets out the government's priorities, that nature is core to Canada's identity. So supporting biodiversity and species at risk are valuable for their own sake, not just for the services they provide to people. CFS has a number of research programs. However, none are focused on urban forestry, but urban forestry is tracked as a cross-cutting priority for all of them, along with a few other priorities that we look at. We have been tracking this since 2020, and the slide shows the results. There have been 148 unique funded research projects. Some of them were funded for just 1 year, while others were funded for multiple years. The cumulative funding is over $10 million, which is about 30% of all the science funding allocated in that time. The pie charts on the right side of the screen represent the comparison between urban forest projects to non-urban forestry projects in these three research hubs as a percent of funding in that program. For example, with the pests hub, we've seen a lot of funding on emerald ash borer mitigation as well as reforestation and future genetics. And as an aside, some of you will have heard that Budget 2025 announced the 2 Billion Trees program will be wound down. So there won't be any future science funding coming from that program, but all the existing commitments were being honored. So that will be planting approximately $1 billion under 1 billion trees under this program. And it's one thing to see the numbers, but it's always helpful to have some qualitative examples. So let me take you through a couple case studies for urban science at the Canadian Forest Service. So the first one I want to talk about is Dan McKenney and John Pedlar's work updating the Canada's plant hardiness zones. So these are maps and national guidelines that show what vegetation can survive in different areas based on maximum and minimum temperatures, as well as other measurements. This was the first update in 10 years, and we've seen some big shifts in certain areas. And for example, Canada's north, which is warming up to 4 times faster than the national average, we're seeing up to 2 whole zone changes in parts of the north. So some big changes afoot here. These plant hardiness zones are informed by species distribution mapping, which are predictive models that assess future climate envelopes and identify where tree species are likely to be found. This could become a future best practice if it's done for enough species, as it's even more tailored than the hardiness zones. And if this work interests you, stay tuned for a CIF-E lecture in April where this will be discussed in detail. Canada's plant hardiness zones have been met with enthusiasm for urban forest managers and gardeners alike who appreciate these accurate climate-informed guidance to make better planting and management decisions. A second case study is about urban forest mapping. And so the CFS, along with the Canadian Centre for Mapping and Earth Observation, are doing research to assess the potential of artificial intelligence applied to satellite imagery to help develop urban forest inventories. And this is being done through a case study in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, led by scientist Doug Pearsley. And so the Corner Brook and the CFS are collaborating to produce a baseline inventory of all the forested areas in Corner Brook using image recognition AI. This is going to be mapped using data from drone-based sensors and verified through detailed ground measurements to see how the drone data is performing. We also know that the benefits from urban forests are not equally distributed. And so part of this project is to be looking at models, to develop models that will take these urban forest inventories along with other data to examine equity and access to urban forests and green space. So now that you have a better idea of what urban forest science at the CFS looks like, I'll tell you a bit more about the urban forest policy work that we do. And this is really more where my team comes in. So the main priority for my team is to better integrate urban and near urban forests in both federal research and federal policy. Urban forestry is an emerging field, and so the CFS research programs were not designed with this in mind. And it is our job to champion urban forests within the CFS and to bring expertise in urban forestry to any collaborative projects that we engage in. We're a small team, and urban forestry is not any of our full-time jobs, but we are making progress, and I'll take you through some examples of the work we've done recently. In the policy realm, so my team wrote and published a new science policy note. This is called the Early Cooling Effect of Urban Trees. And here we're highlighting how trees can act as nature's air conditioning. And this is meant to be short and simple explanation for a non-technical audience for how trees work to cool cities. We note that strategic planting, tree protection, and ensuring trees grow to maturity really do help mitigate urban heat and locally can decrease air temperatures by 3 to 6 degrees Celsius. And really getting into the how, through transpiration and through casting shade. We also created several infographics as part of this note, including 2 that are featured on this slide, and certainly those can be used with credit for any purposes that could be useful for attendees. And as an aside, if you're interfacing with the public and there are topics related to urban forestry that receive lots of questions and would benefit from a note like this for a non-technical information, we would be happy to take suggestions for future work on science policy notes. Up next, this is a collaboration that we did with the U.S. Forest Service, where we translated 2 urban forestry monitoring guides that were produced by U.S. Forest Service researchers from English into French. These guides have also been made available in Spanish, so now this is a great trilingual resource available for communities across North America. These technical reports are helpful for anyone seeking to repeatedly monitor the same sets of individual trees to assess change over time. This could be a repeat inventory of street trees or tracking trees planted through a specific program, including trees on residential lands, parks, or in schools. The first of the 2 reports is a field guide, and it has protocols for monitoring urban trees in the field for this change over time, providing suggestions of metrics such as changes in crown vigor or mortality, survival, and growth. The second, which is a bit more detailed, and it's called Urban Tree Monitoring, a resource guide. It contains strategies and best practices for designing and implementing a monitoring project, including aligning your goals with the variable selections, structuring longitudinal data sets, and managing field crews. This also contains examples of monitoring protocols in action, so you can really see how you can go about doing these. We are also working with our North American counterparts to update the guide on silviculture in North America. The key change for this edition is that we're expanding the number of species to include both exotic and invasive species rather than just native species found in North America. Also, a section on urban forestry is being added for each tree species. And so we are helping with coordinating the reviews of these, the peer reviews. And also, if there's folks who are interested in peer reviewing, we can accommodate that. We are also looking for volunteer authors to draft future chapters. There are a good number of tree species still available. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the Silvix website, and there's a banner under Author a Chapter that provides more information on that. Some of the species we're looking for authors include maybe your favorite trees, such as black spruce, red pine, loblolly pine, serviceberry, lots of species of oaks and maples. Or maybe you would prefer to be an expert on your least favorite tree. So some invasive species, including Russian olive and Amur maple, are available for authors. Some of the other work that we do, we host a community practice with Health Canada for urban forest science and policy. This meets 2 to 3 times a year, and we've had 15 meetings so far. Currently, this is internal to the federal government only, but if any attendees in the audience are interested in attending and work within the federal family, please do reach out and we can add you to our list. This is a great forum to kind of support dialogue and connection, as well as sharing updates. And certainly it's a good way for folks to connect with each other if they're scientists and want to collaborate, et cetera. We're also helping to organize the next edition of the Canadian Urban Forestry Conference, which will be in October 2026 in Quebec City. So mark your calendars for that. Oops, I went advanced slide. So mark your calendars for that. And I'll note too that the request for proposals for this conference is open for another couple days. It closes on March 13th, which is this Friday. So if you're interested in presenting at this conference, you can still submit. And I hope to see some of you there. Um, some of the other work that we're seeing within the federal government on natural infrastructure is really related to natural infrastructure. So urban forests are one of several natural infrastructure tools that can replace gray infrastructure for flooding, hazards, other climate adaptation items. Other tools of natural infrastructure could be wetlands, floodplains, and vegetated buffers along rivers. And so in the right panel of this slide, you can see some of the ways that natural infrastructure supports economic, social, and environmental benefits that gray infrastructure simply cannot provide. And so natural infrastructure supports the economy. In fact, it can be cheaper to install and maintain than gray infrastructure. It protects the environment and it enhances community well-being and livability. So these are all great reasons to use natural infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure. And we are working a little bit with Housing and Communities Infrastructure Canada to support the work on natural infrastructure and making resources and investments available to the public. Some of the other items that we engage in is promoting urban forests and urban trees whenever we can. I believe that experiences in and around nature are a driving reason that people get involved in conservation and forestry, and having a healthy urban forest around you inspires curiosity in ecology, architecture, construction, and STEM in general. Accordingly, we think it's very useful to share news and fun facts about trees, and this is done in particular through a collaboration with Natural Resource Canada's social media teams, especially Simply Science, which is on YouTube and Instagram. We have LinkedIn pages for NRCan Science and Canada's Forests. And we've also done other features with Simply Science, such as a podcast about urban forests. Some of the videos that we've put out have included topics like, why do leaves change color in the autumn? Or why do conifers keep their needles through the winter? We also do tree tours, both virtual and in person. So you can check out our virtual tree tours online that were done by my mentor, Ken Farr, who recently retired from this team. Finally, just to close it off, this is just more for interest, but one area of federal jurisdiction is international relations. And this slide provides an overview of the main international agreements that we are involved in related to urban forestry, although I'll say that this is certainly not a comprehensive list. And so we occasionally provide input into Canada's participation on these international frameworks and reporting for items related to urban forestry. We're definitely seeing a strong interest on the international stage to better consider urban forests and leverage the benefits they provide for climate adaptation, human health, and biodiversity. For example, the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, has a specific target around enhancing urban green spaces. Separately, Target 1 of the CBD seeks to reduce biodiversity loss through planning and managing all areas, which by necessity include urban and near urban areas. And this is especially important in the context of building denser cities and housing our growing population. So thank you so much for your attention today. I'll close it off there. But if you'd like to reach out to me or my team on any of these items or to suggest future work or potential collaborations, we are more than happy to hear from you. And I'll put this email in the chat as well. So thank you so much for your attention. And I'll just note, I'll pass the mic over to Erin to take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks for that great presentation, Aileen, and thanks, Sharon, for the introduction. My name is Erin Fraser-Reid, and I am here to give you a very quick introduction to a new guidebook that Natural Resources Canada is about to release called the Climate Change Adaptation Guidebook for Forest-Based Communities. So I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone on the call here today, but Canada's climate is changing. We're already seeing rising temperatures, shorter winters, stronger and more frequent extreme storms, and changing precipitation patterns. And these changes are affecting all of us already, regardless of the size of the community that we live in. However, small forest-based communities can be especially vulnerable to these types of changes. First of all, these communities are often quite physically close to the forest, so they are much more affected by changes in forest condition than larger urban centers. Also, residents can be often quite connected to the local forests, whether it's for employment, recreation, sustenance, or general quality of life. Also, forest-based communities can sometimes be isolated with few municipal services. And by this, I just mean that oftentimes these communities may not have a municipal planning department that would undertake adaptation planning on behalf of the community. So for these reasons, the Canadian Forest Service has developed a community adaptation guidebook geared towards forest-based communities. So a few of the guidebooks kind of defining principles are on the screen here. And so first and foremost, this is a process that's meant to be led by the community residents. So that means that there's no need to bring in an external facilitator to run this process for the community. The guidebook was written in plain language. It contains tons of examples for brainstorming or ideas, lots of links to other resources. The guidebook does go through a vulnerability assessment approach. So that means that it will help residents understand which specific climate changes are likely to occur in their region, how those changes could affect the places and things that are valued by local people, and then how the community could realistically deal with those changes. So because this is a plan for the community, by the community, of course, collecting feedback from all parts of the community throughout this process is critical. And the guidebook does emphasize feasibility throughout, or otherwise known as adaptive capacity, because what's feasible for one community will be different for a different community, which is part of the reason it's so important to have a local community champion be leading this process. It is a flexible, no one size fits all approach because again, all forest-based communities are different. And then as I mentioned already, the guidebook is about half how to do the process. And then the other half of the guidebook's pages are links to examples and resources from across Canada to really help people work through this. And I guess all that to say that this is really centered around the belief that no one knows small communities better than the people who live there. So this is the process that the guidebook goes through. As you can see, it is broken into 9 steps, which may seem like a lot, but because this guidebook is meant for what I call regular people, so not people who are experts in climate change, environmental science, forestry, etc. It has been broken down into sort of small, manageable, bite-sized steps for people just to make it a little less daunting. So don't worry, I am not going to go through all 9 of these steps in any detail with you here today. Instead, I have condensed the process down into 4 phases, and then I will describe each of these for you today. I'm going to describe them fairly generally, so I'm going to gloss over a lot in this presentation. But if anyone is interested in a deeper dive into the process, or they have specific questions about the process, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to meet either one-on-one or with groups who are interested to learn more. And all my contact information is at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go through these 4 phases. I have listed the guidebook steps that are included in each phase in case anybody's interested in that kind of information. So first, we have the get started phase, and there are 3 guidebook steps inside this phase. The first of which is to identify a community champion. So this is not someone who does all the work. They are more like a committee chair. It can be one person or a small group, again, depending on what works for the community. But regardless, it should be a person or people who are inclusive, motivated, well-connected, and local. Someone with a long track record of volunteering in the community would do a great job as community champion. And again, there is no need for this person to be an expert in climate change. Once that person or group is selected, then the process would begin to get the community interested and wanting to take part in this. So to do that, the community champion would look a little bit into what are the predicted climate changes for their region. Start to think about what those changes could mean for the community and the community's values and priorities, and then also try to think about some potential community benefits from completing a plan like this, and use that information just to pique people's interest, get people interested and to participate in the process. And then once everybody's interested, it's important to sort of get everybody's ducks in a row before really jumping in. And so that's, like finalizing the team membership, stuff like that. But I also wanted to emphasize the scope at this point. And so this is pretty important. I don't want to set any communities up to fail, obviously, by taking on something that's just too big. So this guidebook can be used for a full adaptation plan, of course, but it can also be used for a much narrower plan. If, for example, community residents are quite worried about wildfire risk or flooding risk or something like that, then this process could be used for a more narrow plan as well. And again, it's just the whole mindset of do what works best for your community and always keep in mind feasibility. So once everything is set up, next the work would move into identifying potential impacts from climate change. So there's 2 guidebook steps here, the first of which is called Understand and Explain Why. And so this is where the community champion would start talking to residents. What have they seen already, either in the community itself or maybe in the local forests? And then at the same time, would do a bit of a deeper dive into the local climate data and the climate projections for the region. And then bring that information together with the community members to decide on what are the highest priority climate changes that will be considered in this plan. Again, I'm sure you're all aware, but the potential climate changes that could be considered in a plan like this are numerous and include things like annual or seasonal temperatures, hottest or coldest day, humidex, snow or rainfall amounts, growing season lengths, freeze up or break up timing, sea level changes, and on and on. But obviously there is no need to consider any of these climate changes that the community members don't think are important and that aren't going to impact them directly. The highest priority changes are those deemed most important by the community. So moving on from there, The next step would be to then think a little more about how ecosystems and forests could be affected by the climate changes and then the community itself. And then this is called a climate change impact inventory. And I realize that's a big topic that I went through really quickly. So here is an example, hypothetical, partial climate change impact inventory. So in this example, the highest priority climate changes are warmer temperatures and less rain by 2050s. So from there, the green column in the middle is where the ecosystem responses were starting to get brainstormed. So from here, we see that warmer temperatures are linked to increased evaporation, which then leads to drier plants and soils, and then that would lead to potentially higher wildfire hazards. So from all of those ecosystem responses, then the impacts on the community itself would be brainstormed, and that's in the purple column on the right. So again, you can see in this hypothetical example, the higher wildfire hazards are thought to lead to more interface fires. And these are fires that have the potential to burn from the forest and then also burn community infrastructure. So then there would also be the potential for smoke and other disruptions for residents. And then again, depending on where the water comes from, higher wildfire hazards could lead to more water demand if the water is needed to fight interface fires, and on and on. So this is what a community climate change impact inventory. So from there, the impacts to the community would be evaluated and prioritized. So these are all of the items that were in the purple column on the previous slide. And so each would be examined by the community for likelihood and consequence. And this examination is just done relative to each other. So each impact is scored relative to the other impacts. There's no need to bring in an engineer or architect or what have you to talk about return intervals or anything like this. It is what the community thinks in terms of likelihood and consequence. So this can be done in any number of different ways. It could be the highest potential risk or benefit to the community. It could be the potential to cause the most damage to the community, either in the short or long term, time and resources required to address the issue, or even just community interest in addressing the issue. So from there, once the top priorities have been identified, those would be investigated a little bit deeper for potential adaptation options. So this would be brainstormed, how can we possibly deal with either the risk or the potential benefit that we're seeing from climate change, and then, of course, critically assign responsibility for the implementation of the selected adaptation options. Last phase is called compile and implement, which is probably kind of self-explanatory. But step 8 is compile the plan, and you can see the whole range of considerations and feedback that do go into the plan at this stage. The guidebook was specifically written so that as people proceed through it, they are creating the plan as they go. So once they get to step 8, the plan is basically finished. It's just a matter of now bringing it all together into a single document. And you probably will notice all these bubbles. I didn't talk about all of these today, but you can see that there's quite a variety of considerations that go into plans like this. From there, we arrive at step 9, which would be the implementation and monitoring stage. Arguably, probably the most critical part of the stage or of the process, because I'm sure we all know that the world's greatest plan that is never implemented is not actually that great of a plan. So this is a critical part. And I also did want to highlight this, that the adaptive nature and the fact that adaptation plans are living documents that will need to be updated periodically. We showed that here in the process diagram, where as it moves through from step 1 to 9, you can see that the arrow then feeds right back into step 1 again. So the intent is to use all the learnings and feedback from the first time through an adaptation plan to inform the next. And then I just listed a few questions here on the slide when that might indicate it's time to update an adaptation plan for community. So that is pretty much it. That was a real quick introduction to this guidebook. I did want to let you know that we expect to release the guidebook in probably early summer. The English version is complete, and so we are just working on getting it translated into French right now. And then once that's complete, it will be released. If you would like to be notified of when it is released, please let me know and I will add you to my distribution list. And that is my contact information there, either to get added to the distribution list, or if you want to chat further about anything you did or did not hear today. Thank you.
Thank you, Aileen and Erin, for the great presentation. It was really interesting to hear about the development of the climate change adaptation guidebook for forest-based communities, as well as the important work the Canadian Forest Service is doing in urban forestry research and policy. Okay, now we will move into the Q&A portion for the session. I guess some of our participants are still typing their questions. I can ask a question to Erin. So once the community develops an adaptation plan, what are some common challenges they face when moving from planning to actually implementing adaptation actions?
Yes, there are definitely sometimes some challenges in that space. I would say jurisdiction can often be confusing because depending on the item under consideration, maybe the province and the municipality might share jurisdiction. So figuring out who leads can be challenging. Basically, we try to, or throughout the guidebook, I encourage folks to really engage with their local government throughout the process to let them know this is happening, what they're finding, what the recommendations are. Because of course, if let's say the province is on board with what's happening and it may fall to them to be the main implementer, then they will be less surprised and probably be more open to implementing it if they have been kind of aware and some maybe not wholeheartedly involved, but at least if they know what's happening and they're generally supportive of what's going on, I think that goes a long way to helping with implementation. And then obviously there's just realities like funding and staff time and changing momentum. With the guidebook, it is done by a team of volunteers. So, volunteers can definitely run out of steam, which is again why it's so helpful to have the local governments on board. So then if the volunteers maybe do their bit and then they can hand it off to a local government to take it from there. So yeah, there's a few examples.
Thank you, Erin. And I also have a question for Aileen. So the AI-based urban forest inventory work in Corner Brook is very interesting. Do you see this type of technology becoming more widely used by municipalities across Canada in the future?
Yeah, I think that that would be an important innovation. AI can be used for this, right? I think that the big question with using kind of aerial inventories or satellite-based or drone-based inventories is getting down to the information about the species as well as the health and vigor of the tree. It's essential to have information to manage an urban forest effectively. You can't manage what you don't know, and ground-based inventories do take a lot of personnel time as well as they can be expensive depending on how far you have to go. So I think that if we can move in this direction, it will provide a lot of benefits. We still have, I think, the technology needs to evolve a little bit more, and through, for example, this use case in Corner Brook, it's one way to test it and get more information about how accurate this information is that we're getting from these drone sensors, as well as are we able to train the AI to help us in that manner? So I think that we're still in the early days of this technology, but it does have a lot of promise. And just as an anecdote that I think is sort of interesting, someone who I met who studies at Concordia in Montreal, she was doing some work where they were taking LiDAR images of trees that they took from the city and trying to create an inventory or create a data set so that they can train AI. And they took the measurements of the trees in October because they wanted it when the leaves were gone. However, they found that there was a lot of Halloween decorations hanging from the trees. So that threw off the machine learning process a little bit when you have a ghost on a tree, right? So I think that there's lots of potential, but we're still in the practicalities of implementing it.
You, Aileen. And if you have any follow-up questions, I know Erin and Aileen has shared their contact information in the chat, so feel free to reach out afterwards. Okay, now I would like to bring this session to a close. Thank you all for participating in our CIF electronic lectures. And once again, thank you very much to Aileen and Erin for the great presentation. Bye, everyone.